Well, you see around our building, we have these markers that say worship, serve, and grow. And really what we believe is that those should be the core tenets of our lives. And it should all begin with worship. And then because of that, the outpouring of that is to serve God and to continue to grow as a disciple of Christ, a follower of Christ. And all that means that we let God lead us. We give him the reins of our life, or the steering wheel, if you will. But that's not always so easy, is it? I mean, it's easy when things are going okay and things are flowing, but what can happen is we can start with these great intentions, but then life hits and maybe we get a little weary of this ongoing struggle, and we maybe get lax in our life. Life knocks us around and we start thinking, well, maybe there's a better way. And we have a remarkable tendency towards self-deceit. As a matter of fact, the Bible calls it thinking to ourself. Thinking to ourself. And so then what happens is that God can slip down the list, and other things become more important to us and more secure for us. Thinking to ourselves. That's when I make myself the core consultant. That's when I consult my own desires before anything else. That's when God's advice gets stifled, and so I compromise. And if I'm not careful, one day I find myself living in the land of the enemy. The territory that the enemy is in control of, and then when I'm there, eventually all hell will break loose. Pardon the pun. That's why occasionally I need to refocus. I need to take a look and say, where am I living? What's predominant? Whose thinking is driving me? Is it mine? And I think the best way to evaluate me is to ask objectively, where do I find my security? Now, there's a great story from the life of David, the Old Testament king, and it's from 1 Samuel 30, and I want to set it up for you because if you don't understand the beginning part, you're probably not going to get the rest. So, these were very dark times for this nation, Israel. Israel had been clamoring for God to send a Savior in the form of a human king. They didn't have a king to this point. And so they begged God for a king. Well, God was upset with them because he said, hey, I want to be your king. I want you to follow me. But that wasn't good enough for them. So he finally gave in and he said, okay, here's your king. And so he gave them this man named Saul. Now this was 1,000 years before Christ. And they thought, once we have a king, we'll be like the rest of the nations. We'll have power, we'll have glory, and no one will stand against us, even though they couldn't stand against them with God in charge, but they weren't buying that. And so it's 1,000 years before Jesus. There were no elections. So if the king was a dud, hey, you were stuck with his kids. That's how it worked. There was no election cycle 4 years out. No, it didn't work that way. So we know that God ultimately decides who will be king, and he decides when he decides to make a change. So he orchestrates the rise of David, son of Jesse. Now, David was probably the most unlikely of people to be offered the kingship. In the first place, he was the runt child of 8 brothers who were all pretty great in their own right. As a matter of fact, when the prophet came to his home, Samuel came to his home to select the king, his father didn't even bring him up. He said, hey, here's 8 great ones. Take one of these guys. David was out with the sheep. No, Samuel said, none of them are here. Bring the kid in. This is my guy. Here he is. Now, only God can orchestrate that. But it wasn't just like, okay, now he has a crown, because Saul was still king, right? And so he orchestrates this great moment where David goes to the battlefield. I think you know the story. There's a 9-foot tall giant. He slings his rock at him, knocks him out, kills him. and he becomes a national hero. And so from that, he's given the hand of Saul's daughter, Michal, to marry. And he's given power over men. He's made a leader. And I think Saul at this point is saying, man, this is the best hire I ever made. This guy is successful. He's taking care of my daughter. Things are great. That is until David became more famous than him. And he started getting jealous. On one occasion, he hears the women of the city, Saul that is, singing a song of victory about battle. And it was a great tune. The first verse Saul loved. It said, "We have a great king." But he didn't like the second verse so much. "But David is greater." And it just got him, it just irked him. This punk, I'm going to take him out. So Saul turns on David. For years he tries to kill him with no success because, of course, he's anointed by God. David, in the meantime, gathers a group of 600 mercenaries to fight for him and for, really, frankly, for a price. These were outcasts. Some of them were wanted men. Most of them were in debt. They were kind of like a 1000 BC biker gang without the Harleys. They were just like these marauders who would go out and do crazy things, because they had this lone wolf leader who was anointed named David, a powerful leader. And David was a great leader. If he was nothing else, he was a great leader. Well, so they're on the run. They're doing their marauding. And David got tired of it. He got tired of being on the run. And even though it had been prophesied that he would become the king, he got bored, he got tired, he got impatient, and he crossed a line. To escape Saul's pursuit of him, he moved into enemy territory. He moved into the land of the Philistines. He cut a deal. And so for years, he and his men would go out and do your bandit marauding stuff for a price, and then they go home to Ziklag, the name of their town, which was in the land of the enemy. Now, I don't know where you are today. Maybe you are on the run, so to speak, running from God, running from your past, running from yourself. Maybe you've been hanging out way too much in enemy territory. And as soon as I said that, you knew what I meant, because you know you're there. I don't know. But if that describes you, low on worship, low on waiting, impatient, wanting a change like David, maybe it's your time. So we're going to read from 1 Samuel chapter 30, and you thought, oh man, I thought we'd be getting to the next song by now. This took a long time just to get here. Wrong-o, we got some things to do yet. 1 Samuel 30, verses 1 through 6. So remember, they've been out doing their bandit stuff. They're marauding their, army for hire gig, following David, the great leader. David and his men reached Ziklag on the third day. So a long trip home. Now the Amalekites had raided the Negev and Ziklag. They had attacked Ziklag and burned it, and had taken captive the women and everything else in it, both young and old. Killed none of them, but carried them off as they went on their way. When David and his men reached Ziklag, they found it destroyed by fire, and their wives and sons and daughters taken captive. So David and his men, listen to this, wept out loud until they had no strength left to weep. They thought it was all gone. They had no hope. David's two wives have been captured, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. Now you talk about a tough homecoming. David and his men have been fighting, have been out there, scraping away for their families. They get home, they find it burnt to the ground, they find all the things they love gone, taken. Have you ever gone on a trip, maybe a long trip? Maybe some of you in the military can relate to this, right? So, you've been gone for a considerable length of time, a month, 6 months, deployed. I can only imagine what that's like. I was talking to Brad Kuhn about it earlier and just talking about his experience. But I can't imagine what it'd be like to be gone that long. And so you're longing. I would think that the longer you're away, the more you yearn for home. I would think that'd be the way it is. And so finally you get to go home. And you're thinking, I get to sleep in my own bed. I get to hug my little kids who have now grown by a year. I get to kiss my wife. I mean, you're just excited about that whole thing. And so the closer you get to home, the more excited you get. You turn the corner and there's the fishing spot that you use with you and your son, or the hunting place. Or you get closer and you say, oh, this is where we had that picnic with my family that day. And so you see all these markers. And then finally, you turn the bend down that last street, and there it is. There's home. Must feel great. So here's David and the gang, been gone for months. Now they approach, they see the familiar markers, they see all those things I described, and they what do they see when they get there? Their homes are burned. Everything's gone. It's a ghost town. And they think everyone's dead, I'm sure. Now, I have no idea where you are right now. I have no idea if my description of home for you, you'd say, you know what, so to speak, he just described my home. Decimated, destroyed, desperate. I would say in a church this size, a lot of you feel like David and his men must have felt when they discovered what had happened. Your expectations of home and the reality of what you find are two different things. That's what we find in chapter 30. So the question I need to ask myself, when I need to recalibrate, when I need to adjust, is this. Here's the question. Where do I find my security? Where do I find my security? What is my value? What's my purpose? What is it, what is it that, when I wake up in the morning, that's what I love and that's what I work for. That's where I find my hope. That's what gets me up in the morning, right? Now, there are 5 key places that most people will find security. And by the way, all these have value. None of them are wrong or bad. It's just that only one will sustain you. But here they are, and they make sense. The first is family, right? We find our security in our wives, our husbands, our children, our closeness with our family. But then marriage struggle and relationships get strained, and we have this ideal about home that when we turn the bend, though, it's just a different reality than we thought it was going to be. When you got married, you didn't think you were going to deal with all that stuff, but now you are. David came back, he and his men, they found their families gone. It's kind of like the guy that gets back from a business trip, right? And he walks in the door and he thinks, I'm going to see the family, and there's a note that says, hey, me and the kids, we're with mom. Don't bother calling. That's pretty much how he must have felt. Or like the parent who pours all your time and all your effort and all your energy on raising those little kids to be successful, powerful human beings. And you spend all the money and you spend all the time, and you wake up one day and you think, man, they never call me. It's like they don't even care if I exist. And that happens, doesn't it? Or it's like the man or woman who stands at the cemetery and watches the love of their life lowered into the grave. And you go, well, there's that. There's my security going down into that hole. Because that's what happens. Family is a great blessing, but ultimately cannot provide me with security. What about friends? The second thing we find security in. As much as we'd like to think we're self-made and independent, we are built for relationship. We have to have friendship. And I've got great friends. I love my friends. But we're hardwired that we need them, to trust them. You hope they'll have your back. You hope that if you go into a fight, so to speak, they're going to fight with you. Most of us receive our value based on whether or not we have those kinds of friends. Am I loved? Am I respected? Will they be there for me when things get thin? And let's face it, friends usually are different when we're happy and wholesome and prosperous. But what about when that stuff disappears? I guess you really find out who your friends are, right? When things are in turmoil. Are they going to be there for you then? Because if they're not your friends. And some of you, you want to please people so much that you'll try to get love from the wrong people, and you know in your heart they're not going to be there for you when you go down. You know it, but you do it anyway. What about possessions? Because, if I can't find it in family and I can't find it in friends, I'm certainly going to try to buy some security. I'm going to, build up my walls, and I'm going to make sure I've got the house and the car and the stuff and the money. But then what happens when 2008 turns into 2015? We're 16 now, isn't it? It goes so fast. I said 17 in the early service, so I've got date confusion going on all the time. What about when that goes, right? You guys are going to hear some interesting things in the next 3 years here. That's all I have to say. You got to show up. You never know. What about position? So much of my ego and pride can fall on who I am, right? Whoever that is for you. You go to work and you build up a career and you get the job title and people go, oh, you're that now, huh? And it's not just men, it's ladies and men both. And you know what? It's all about position. It's all about how people see me. Women grinding it out, trying to break through the glass ceiling so they can match up, right? Now back to David. He comes over the hill. He wants to fall back on all the things that he found security with, and they're all gone. Family and possessions taken. And something else happens here. His position is in grave jeopardy because his friends want to kill him. That's what happens. It says David was greatly distressed because the men were talking of stoning him. Each one was bitter in spirit because of his sons and daughters. They blamed him. If it wasn't for that guy, we wouldn't have been off marauding. He's such a great leader and takes us out there. We lose our families. Let's stone the guy. Now, there's nothing wrong with finding a sense of security in family and friends and possessions and position. And all of them do provide a sense of that. But where am I going to put my ultimate trust? Because often in an instant, what we're going to find out is those things are quickly taken from us. I've sat through far too many funerals. I guess I've sat in far too many counseling, family, marriage counseling meetings. I've had far too many looks at my Charles Schwab account. And by the way, that position thing, you make one or two mistakes, there's always a critic out there. Believe me, there is. And so, for all of that, where will it lead me? If my ultimate value and hope and security are found in those things, I'm always in danger of being decimated. So there's a fifth thing that we should find now, what do you think is going to be from the preacher? The fifth thing we should find our security in. What do you think? Yeah, you've been come to church long enough. You know what I'm going to say. You say, well, why would we need to say it? Because we forget. That's why we need to say it. Where does David turn? He turns to Sunday school answers. Listen to what happens. Verse 6. All this has taken place. They come home devastated. They want to stone him. David found strength in the Lord his God. You're going, duh. He's David, the Old Testament guy, the Bible guy after God's own heart, right? That's what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking. But you maybe haven't read the previous 3 chapters before this. For years, David had been doing it his way. And when he got weary, he was on the run from this evil king, he let God slip down the chart. And I think that's ironic because most of us don't turn to God first. We turn in order to family, friends, stuff, and our position, or let's just say our jobs. Let's just say that. When all else fails, he goes to God, and that is all so familiar. You know how in a movie, like they'll start out and it's an action movie, so the opening scene is like, explosions and guns getting shot and people diving out of cars and cars going into rivers and it's really exciting. You go, man, this can be a great movie. And then for like the next hour, it's like this backstory, right? When you go back and it's like, oh, this is how this all started. They were in this little suburb and everybody was having breakfast. You know how it is, right? Well, that's what we're going to do right now. Now, you thought, oh, this should be over with by now. No, it's not over. We got to go a little further. Back in 1 Samuel 27, there's this little statement that you might even miss if you're reading it. Here's what it says. This is after he'd been on the run, after years of trying to, to preserve himself, even though he had this promise he's going to be king. The evil king's chasing him, right? And so here's what it says, this little verse, 1 Samuel 27:1. Then David thought to himself. You say, well, that's not so bad. Oh, it's really bad. Because I don't know about you, I carry out the most dangerous conversations with myself. That guy is an idiot. Okay? That's the guy that says, you better take control, buddy. You better run. You better do it your way or you're going to lose it all. David talked to himself. I know what will make sense, he said. I'll move into the land of the enemy. That makes sense. And that's what he did. And so for the next 3 chapters, he's living with the enemy, doing it David's way. I will fall back on my family and my friends and my possessions and my position. That's what he's doing. And he took God and he just pushed him down. He pushed him away. But then when the bottom drops out, what does David do? He does what most of us do. God help. That's chapter 30. Now look what happens. Verse 7 in chapter 30 now. Then David said to Abiathar the priest, the son of Ahimelech, bring me the ephod. Now what's the ephod? The ephod's this really cool thing, right? The high priest wears a vest. It has 2 rocks in it. Mike Wagner said one's black, the other's white, and they're hidden. The ephod's like this magical 8-ball for David. And so he brings the priest, and he consults the ephod. And here's the question he asks with the ephod. Shall I pursue this raiding party? Will I overtake them? Now that's a strange question. Why would you even ask that? Because look, you're in danger of being stoned yourself. You better do something, buddy. If somebody's got to die, it might as well be the people that took your families. I'll tell you why he asked that question and why it's important. It's important because he asked the question. That's why it's important. It's important because he consulted God and not himself. That's why it's important. Pursue them, he answered. You will certainly overtake them and succeed in the rescue. Okay, long story short, David rallies the men, pursues the enemies. They have a battle that lasts like 24 hours, this huge epic battle. Actually, it's with 400 men because 200 bailed on them down the road a ways. They win the battle, get all their stuff back. All their families are safe. They come back. They take all the families of all the 600 and they all go back to Ziklag and everything's great. And so David regains his family and his friends and his stuff and his position. As a matter of fact, his position went boom. And it was not long he became. Now, something became very obvious to me as I read this story. And I don't know, sometimes things just hit me. And it's that, David hadn't abandoned God. He just let him slip down the depth chart. It's like, hey, God, number 5. And I would say, I don't know how you are. That would have to be me. That's the way I would do it. God, I want you to lead my life from the 5th position. But then in chapter 30, it's like, okay, God, you get to be number 1. You get to be where you belong. David says, God, I'm going to stop excluding you. I'm going to start praying to you again. That's really what happened. He started talking to God. Now, okay, confession from the preacher. Little dirt on the preacher. And you're saying, going, oh, great. I've been waiting for this moment where the big mouth actually tells us what he's really like. I got lots of dirt, let me tell you right now. Lots of it. Prayer. I struggle with prayer. Always have. I struggle. I lead a meeting with our staff. We always pray. And oftentimes in my mind I'm going, let's get through this prayer because we got a meeting to have. Because, I've led, hundreds of meetings. Why do I need to pray? And so that's me. We seek the Lord, but in my mind, I fight it. We got a lot to do here. The day only has so many hours. Come on, Nick, let's get going. He's a good prayer. What about with my beautiful wife? Always fanning the prayer flame in our family. But in my heart, I'm often pushing back, it's like, oh man, I don't know. I prayed 8 times today, honey. I prayed with 3 people whose marriages were falling apart. We went to the hospital. We had 2 prayers there. We had that Nick prayer in the staff meeting. Man, that went forever. Now I'm going to pray with you? Really? Yeah, really? Look, I know what I'm supposed to be doing as a husband. I know what I'm supposed to be doing as a preacher. I know what I'm supposed to be doing as a father. I write sermons every week about it. I've got it down. Why do I need to seek the Lord? I'll tell you why. Because I will only find my security as a husband and as a friend, as a preacher, and in my stuff. If God has it, that's why. So here's my challenge to you. God has not changed. The way that God met David is the way that God meets you. And if you want to be on a binge where you talk to yourself and you put him in 5th place, when it comes to your security, he's not going to stop you. But let me tell you what's going to happen, and I'm not a prophet. I'm a guy who lives life. Family, friends, stuff, and position, they're all fleeting. Not him. He's not going anywhere. And he'll take you where you need to go. You will find your strength in your God. That's what David found out. The simple evaluation, the simple question. Where is God on the list? Worship is when I say, God, let's do this together. Let's do this your way. So God, we worship you today. First of all, we worship you just by coming, by being open to hearing what you have to say, by reflecting, figuring out where we are with you. And Lord, if we've done what David probably have, and maybe we are, if we let you slip to number 5 or 4 or 3 or whatever number isn't number 1, God, open our eyes. And Lord, let that start now when we commune and we again come to the table of remembrance where we remember that you're number 1 and you deserve to be because of what you've done for us. Let it continue on in our singing and our praise and our giving. Let that be reflected in number 1. Not me, but you. And then, Lord, maybe perchance there's a decision to be made by somebody. The decision to say, yes, Lord, for the first time. So that you can be superior. And so that you can be secure in us. And I can be secure in you. And we thank you, Jesus. Amen.